The vampire king's scream shattered every window in the throne room, and 3 servants died before his rage could be contained. Seraphina Dawson heard the sound from 6 floors below, where she scrubbed blood from marble that had seen centuries of violence. Her hands trembled in the cold water, soap suds mixing with the dark stains that never fully disappeared. She had been working in the hidden palace beneath Chicago for 3 months now, ever since her mother's debts had been transferred to her upon death. The vampire courts didn't forgive financial obligations, and they certainly didn't care that she was only 22 years old with a degree in music therapy she'd never get to use. Another crash echoed through the stone corridors. The other human servants scattered like mice, but Seraphina remained kneeling on the floor, her brush moving in steady circles. Running only made things worse. She'd learned that in her first week when Marcus, a boy who'd owed money for his father's gambling, had tried to flee. They'd found pieces of him in 4 different rooms. "The king demands silence," a voice said above her. Seraphina looked up to find Lucienne, one of the king's personal guards, standing with her arms crossed. The vampire woman's white hair fell like silk down her back, and her pale skin seemed to glow in the dim light. "Your presence is requested in the throne room." Seraphina's heart stuttered. "I haven't done anything wrong, that remains to be seen." Lucienne's crimson eyes held no warmth. "Stand now." The walk to the throne room felt like a march to execution. Seraphina's worn sneakers made soft sounds against the stone, so different from Lucienne's silent glide. They passed through corridors lined with tapestries depicting vampire victories throughout history, past doors that led to chambers Seraphina had never seen and hoped she never would. The palace existed in layers beneath the city, a kingdom of shadows and old stone that the mortal world above had forgotten existed. The throne room doors were massive things of carved oak and iron. They opened without touch, swinging wide to reveal a space of terrible beauty. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into darkness above. Pillars of white marble stretched upward like bones, and there, on a throne that looked carved from a single piece of black stone, sat Zathrian Penrose, the vampire king. Seraphina had only seen him twice before, and both times from a great distance. Up close he was devastating. His white hair fell past his shoulders, and his skin held the pallor of death in moonlight. His features were sharp and perfect, like something sculpted by an artist who understood beauty and cruelty in equal measure. He wore black, always black, tailored clothing that somehow seemed both modern and ancient. But his eyes were what made her breath catch. They burned red like coals, like the heart of a fire that had been burning for so long it had forgotten how to go out. Those eyes fixed on her, and Seraphina felt the weight of centuries pressing against her consciousness. "You're the one who sings," Zathrian said. His voice was deep, melodic, touched with an accent that belonged to no country that currently existed on any map. "I've heard you. In the servant quarters. At night when you think no one listens." Seraphina's mouth went dry. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I'll stop. I didn't say I wanted you to stop." He leaned forward, and the movement was too fluid, too perfectly controlled. "Tell me, little human, do you know why you're here?" "No, Your Majesty. I am losing my mind," he said it plainly, as if commenting on the weather. "For 300 years I have ruled this territory with absolute control. I have negotiated treaties, ended wars, built an empire beneath this city that the mortal world cannot begin to comprehend, and now I find myself unable to think, unable to rest, unable to exist without rage consuming every thought." Seraphina didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Zathrian continued, 2 weeks ago, I killed a diplomat from the eastern courts because his voice irritated me. Last week I destroyed an entire wing of this palace because someone closed a door too loudly. Yesterday, I nearly executed my own brother because he suggested I required blood from an older vintage. He stood, and even that movement seemed violent. I am becoming a monster even by our standards, and in 3 days, representatives from every major vampire house in North America will arrive for the Centennial Council. If I cannot control myself, they will move to depose me. The resulting power struggle will lead to war. "I don't understand what this has to do with me," Seraphina whispered. "You sing at night," Zathrian repeated. "Soft songs, gentle things, human lullabies." He moved down the steps from his throne, each footfall deliberate. "And for reasons I cannot explain, when I hear your voice through the stone, the rage lessens. Not much, but enough that I notice." He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could see the inhuman stillness of his chest, the way he didn't breathe unless he chose to. Close enough to see the exhaustion etched into immortal features. "I want you to sing for me now," he said. Seraphina's mind blanked. "Here now, unless you'd prefer I tear you apart and find another human with a pleasant voice." The threat was delivered casually, but she heard the truth beneath it. The control he was exercising at this very moment. the way his hands flexed at his sides like he was fighting the urge to break something. She cleared her throat. Her mouth felt like cotton and her hands shook, but she reached for the first song that came to mind. The lullaby her mother used to sing back before the gambling, before the debts, before everything fell apart. "Hush now, quiet now, it's time to lay your sleepy head," she sang, her voice thin and wavering at first. "Hush now, quiet now, it's time to go to bed." The silence that followed was absolute. Zathrian stood perfectly still, his red eyes locked on her face. Then he raised one pale hand and gestured for her to continue. Seraphina sang the whole thing, then another, then a third. Simple songs, children's songs, lullabies meant to soothe and calm. Her voice grew steadier as she sang, muscle memory from years of vocal training taking over. She'd wanted to be a music therapist, to use songs to help people heal. The irony of using those skills now for this wasn't lost on her. When she finished the third song, Zathrian released a breath he hadn't needed to take. The red in his eyes had dimmed to something closer to amber. "Again," he said, and there was something almost desperate in the command. She sang for an hour, maybe longer. Her throat grew raw, but she didn't stop. The Vampire King stood before her, eyes closed, and something about his expression shifted. The rage that had made the air feel electric slowly dissipated. His shoulders, which had been rigid as stone, loosened incrementally. Finally, he raised a hand. "Enough." Seraphina's voice cut off mid-verse. She swayed slightly, exhausted. Zathrian opened his eyes and they were still red but calmer, more focused. "You will come to me every evening at sunset. You will sing until I dismiss you. In exchange, your mother's debt will be reduced by $5,000 for each session." Hope flared in Seraphina's chest before she could stop it. Her mother had owed $70,000. At $5,000 per session, she could be free in 14 days, 2 weeks. It seemed impossible. "Do you accept?" Zathrian asked. "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Then go, return at sunset tomorrow. Tell no one of this arrangement." Lucienne appeared at her side to escort her out, but Seraphina glanced back once before the throne room doors closed. The Vampire King had returned to his throne, but he sat differently now. Less like a predator about to strike. More like someone carrying a weight he couldn't put down. The next day crawled by. Seraphina scrubbed floors, changed linens in rooms where vampires slept through the daylight hours in beds that looked like coffins but weren't, and tried not to think about the evening ahead. The other servants whispered around her, sensing something had changed but not knowing what. She kept her head down and her mouth shut. When sunset painted the small windows near the ceiling in shades of orange and red, Lucienne came for her again. This time Seraphina was taken to a different room, smaller than the throne room but no less impressive. A study, perhaps, or a private chamber. Books lined the walls, ancient texts in languages she didn't recognize. A massive desk dominated one corner, covered in papers and maps, and near the window, in a chair that probably cost more than her entire life, sat Zathrian. He looked up when she entered. "You came. You commanded it," she said carefully. "I did." He set aside the book he'd been reading. "But humans have tried to flee before, despite commands, despite threats. You chose to return. You offered me freedom. I offered you reduced debt. Freedom is debatable." He gestured to a cushioned seat near his chair. "Sit. Your voice will carry better if you're comfortable." Seraphina sat. The cushion was soft, luxurious. She'd been sleeping on a thin mattress in a room shared with 6 other servants. This single chair was more comfortable than anything she'd experienced in months. "What should I sing?" she asked. "Whatever brings you peace," Zathrian said. "I find that such songs work best," so she sang. Different lullabies this time, some in English, some in French that she'd learned in school. She sang songs her grandmother had taught her, folk melodies that had been passed down through generations. And as she sang, she watched the Vampire King. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things often were. The sharp angles of his face, the perfect proportion of his features, the way his white hair caught the lamplight and seemed to glow. But there were cracks in the facade if you looked closely. A tightness around his mouth, a tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair like he was holding himself back from something violent. An hour passed, then 2. Finally Zathrian spoke. "Tell me something, Seraphina Dawson, do you fear me?" She considered lying, then decided truth was safer. "Yes, good, you should." He turned his head to look at her directly. "But you don't let fear silence your voice. Why?" "Because dying quickly while singing seems better than dying slowly while scrubbing floors," she said. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. A pragmatist, how refreshing. He stood, moving to the window. Outside, Chicago's nighttime skyline glittered. "Do you know how old I am?" "No, Your Majesty. I was born in 1492. I watched the world change from a place of swords and horses to one of guns and machines. I've outlived empires. I've seen plagues come and go. I've loved and lost more times than you can imagine. His reflection in the glass was ghostly, barely there. And somewhere in all those centuries I forgot how to be still. How to exist without violence. The rage became part of me. Essential. I thought I needed it to survive. Seraphina didn't know what to say to that, so she simply listened. Then I heard you singing, he continued. Such a small, insignificant thing. A human girl singing to herself in the dark, and for the first time in decades the rage quieted. He turned from the window. Tell me why. I don't know, she admitted. I studied music therapy in college. There's science about how music affects the brain, about rhythm and emotional regulation, but I don't know if that applies to vampires. Music therapy, he repeated. You wanted to heal people with songs. I did, I do. She met his eyes, those burning red eyes. But my mother got sick and the treatments were expensive, and she borrowed money from people she shouldn't have. When she died, the debt transferred to me. The vampire courts own financial institutions throughout the city. They offered me a way to work off what was owed. Indentured servitude, Zathrian said flatly. A practice I've long argued we should abolish, but I'm regularly outvoted by the other houses. He moved back to his chair, but instead of sitting, he stood beside it. How much did your mother owe? $70,000. Hospital bills, mostly. And the funeral costs, and in 3 days, if all goes well at the Centennial Council, you'll still owe $45,000. He said it like he was calculating something. Unless I increase the payment per session, or forgive the debt entirely. Hope bloomed again, painful and bright. Would you? I don't know yet. His honesty was startling. I am trying, Seraphina Dawson, to determine if your voice truly helps me, or if I'm simply finding new ways to exercise cruelty. The line between the two is thinner than you might think. She stood, emboldened by exhaustion and the strange intimacy of the conversation. You haven't hurt me. You've paid me for my time. That's not cruelty. Give me time, he said darkly. I excel at finding ways to cause pain. Then why warn me? Why not just do it? The question seemed to surprise him. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Because you remind me, he said slowly, of what it was like to be human. To have such a short time that you must fill it with songs and hope and stubborn determination to survive. He moved toward the door, a clear dismissal. Return tomorrow. Same time. Seraphina left, but his words haunted her through the night. The pattern continued for 3 more days. Each evening she was brought to Zathrian's study. Each evening she sang for hours while he sat and listened, and gradually became something other than the monster everyone said he was. They talked between songs. Small conversations that grew longer each night. She learned he had been a scholar before his transformation, studying philosophy and astronomy, at a time when such pursuits could get you killed by the church. She learned he had a brother named Constantine, who served as his second in command. She learned he loved music but couldn't bear to hear it most days because it made the rage worse, except for her voice, which somehow did the opposite. He learned she had wanted to help children, specifically those with trauma. She learned music could reach people when words couldn't. He learned she missed her mother desperately, but also resented her for the choices that had led to this. He learned she had never been in love, never had time for it between school and work and caring for a dying parent. On the 4th night, the night before the Centennial Council, Zathrian seemed particularly agitated. He paced while she sang, his movements sharp and controlled but barely. When she paused between songs, he spoke without looking at her. Tomorrow you will witness something of our world that humans rarely see. The council convenes in the Grand Hall. Every major vampire house will send representatives. There will be negotiations, power plays, old grudges surfacing. He ran a hand through his white hair. And there will be those who seek to prove I'm unfit to rule. Are you unfit? Seraphina asked quietly. He laughed, the sound bitter. By human standards, absolutely. By vampire standards, that depends on who you ask. He finally stopped pacing, standing in front of her. I need you there tomorrow night, at the council. Why? Because if I begin to lose control, your voice may be the only thing that prevents a bloodbath. His red eyes searched her face. I'm asking you to stand in a room full of predators who would kill you without a second thought, and sing if I give you the signal. It's dangerous, possibly fatal, but I'm asking anyway. Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs. Every survival instinct screamed at her to refuse. But she thought about freedom, about the debt being erased, about this strange vampire king who listened to lullabies and talked to her like she was a person rather than property. What's the signal? She asked. Relief flashed across his face, gone so quickly she almost missed it. I'll tap my ring against the throne's arm. 3 times. You'll be standing in an alcove behind a screen. The other vampires won't see you immediately, but they'll hear you. And if it doesn't work, if my singing doesn't help, then you run, he said simply. Lucienne will be stationed near you. She'll get you out. She doesn't like me. She doesn't like anyone. But she's loyal and she'll follow my orders." He reached out, and for a moment Seraphina thought he might touch her face. Instead, he dropped his hand. "Sing something now. I need to practice maintaining control while conducting business." So she sang while he returned to his desk and sorted through papers, his movements gradually becoming less tense. She sang until her voice grew rough, and when she finally stopped, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," he said, and the words sounded strange in his mouth, like he didn't say them often. "You're welcome. 10,000, he said abruptly. "What?" "Your payment for tomorrow night, $10,000 off your debt. That will leave you owing 35,000. Assuming tonight counts as a session." "Why so much?" "Because I'm asking you to risk your life." He stood. "And because I'm starting to believe you might be the only reason I survive tomorrow with my crown intact." The weight of that statement settled over her as Lucienne appeared to escort her back to the servant quarters. As she walked through the stone corridors, Seraphina wondered what exactly she had agreed to. The next evening, she was brought to the grand hall 3 hours before the council convened. The space was enormous, larger than the throne room, with a ceiling that soared into darkness and walls lined with ancient weapons and armor. The throne sat on a raised platform at one end, and facing it were seats arranged in a semicircle, each marked with the symbol of a different vampire house. Lucienne led her to an alcove behind an ornate screen. "You'll wait here. Don't make a sound unless the king signals you. Don't draw attention, and if things go badly, follow me without question." "How will I know if things go badly?" "You'll know," Lucienne said grimly. She positioned Seraphina behind the screen, where she could see the hall but would remain hidden in shadow. "The king has enemies. Some are old, some are new. All of them would love to see him fall. But he's strong. Everyone says he's the most powerful vampire in North America. Physical power isn't everything. Politics can kill just as effectively as fangs." Lucienne checked the weapons concealed beneath her jacket. "He's been unstable. That makes him vulnerable. They'll push him, try to trigger the rage, use it as evidence that he needs to step down. That's horrible. That's our world." Lucienne gave her a long look. "Your singing seems to help him. I don't understand it, and I don't particularly care. But if you can keep him stable tonight, you'll have earned your freedom 10 times over." Then she left, taking up a position near the alcove where she could watch both Seraphina and the hall. Vampires began to arrive as sunset deepened into full darkness. They came in pairs and small groups, all of them striking and terrible in their beauty. White skin, white hair in various lengths and styles, red eyes that glowed in the lamplight. They wore fine clothing, modern tailoring mixed with old-world elegance, and they moved with a predator's grace that made Seraphina's prey instincts scream. She recognized some faces from her months in the palace. Constantine, Zathrian's brother, arrived with several members of the king's inner circle. He looked like a younger version of Zathrian, though his expression held more warmth. Others she didn't know. A woman in a blood-red gown who carried herself like royalty. A man with a scarred face who kept his hand on the sword at his hip. A trio of vampires who whispered among themselves and cast venomous looks toward the empty throne. When Zathrian finally entered, the hall fell silent. He wore black as always, but tonight it was formal, ornate. A coat that fell to his knees, tailored perfectly to his frame. His white hair had been pulled back, revealing the sharp lines of his face, and his eyes burned red like warning lights. He moved to the throne with controlled precision, and Seraphina could see the effort it took. The tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched. He sat, arranged himself perfectly, and spoke. "Thank you all for attending the Centennial Council. We have much to discuss regarding territory agreements, blood source management, and relations with the human governments." His voice carried through the hall, commanding and cold. I suggest we begin," interrupted the vampire with the scarred face, "by addressing the concern on everyone's mind. Your stability, Zathrian." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Zathrian's fingers tightened on the throne's arms. "My stability is not council business, Lord Matthias. It is when you're killing diplomats and destroying palace wings." Matthias stood, addressing the room rather than the king. "How many of you have heard the reports? The rage episodes increasing in frequency and severity? This is not a ruler, this is a liability." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled vampires. Constantine rose immediately. "My brother has ruled this territory successfully for 3 centuries. A few difficult months don't erase that legacy." "A few difficult months?" The woman in red laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "He nearly killed Ambassador Severin for clearing his throat. He's one bad day away from slaughtering everyone in this hall." "Lady Vivian exaggerates," Zathrian said. but his voice had gone tight. Seraphina could see the rage building behind his eyes, the way his whole body tensed like a coiled spring. "Do I?" Vivian moved closer to the throne, deliberately provocative. "Show us then. Show us the control everyone claims you still possess. Let me speak freely about how you're failing, how your reign is crumbling, how perhaps it's time for new leadership, and remain calm. Prove you're fit to rule." It was a trap. Everyone in the hall knew it. The vampires watched with predatory interest as Vivienne continued speaking, her words designed to cut, to provoke, to push Zathrian past his breaking point, and Seraphina watched the king struggle. His breathing came faster even though he didn't need to breathe. His hands gripped the throne so hard the stone cracked beneath his fingers. The red in his eyes grew brighter, burning like flames. "Perhaps Lord Constantine would make a better king," Vivienne continued. "Or perhaps we should divide the territory among the major houses. Anything would be better than watching you destroy everything our kind has built here." Zathrian stood abruptly. The movement was violent, barely controlled. Several vampires reached for weapons. Constant moved to his brother's side, speaking too low for Seraphina to hear. Then Zathrian's hand moved to the throne's arm. He tapped his ring against the stone, once, twice, 3 times, the signal. Seraphina's throat closed with fear. Every eye in the hall was on the king. If she started singing now, they'd all turn to look at her. A human in a room full of vampires. Prey among predators, but she'd promised. She took a breath and began to sing. Her voice drifted through the hall, soft at first but growing stronger. The lullaby her mother used to sing, gentle and soothing. The effect was immediate and startling. Every vampire turned toward the alcove, searching for the source. Seraphina saw confusion, anger, and in some cases recognition, but Zathrian's response was what mattered. His posture shifted. The violent tension eased incrementally, his breathing slowed. The burning red of his eyes dimmed to amber, then to something almost brown. "What is this?" Matthias demanded. "Is this a joke? Some kind of manipulation?" "No manipulation," Constantine said, and Seraphina could hear the wonder in his voice. "Look at him. It's working." Zathrian sank back onto the throne, his expression shifting from rage to something like relief. He gestured for Seraphina to continue, and she did, her voice filling the enormous hall. She sang lullabies and folk songs, anything gentle and calming. And as she sang, the king, who had been moments from violence, slowly, visibly relaxed. The assembled vampires watched in stunned silence. Vivienne's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and calculation. Matthias looked furious, but others seemed almost moved by the sight. When Seraphina finished the 3rd song, Zathrian raised a hand. She fell silent, her heart pounding. The king stood again, but this time his movements were controlled, graceful. He looked out over the council with clear eyes. "As you can see," he said calmly, "I have found a method to manage the rage. A human with training in music therapy has proven effective where nothing else has worked." He glanced toward the alcove, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Lady Vivienne, you claimed I would slaughter everyone here, yet when you deliberately provoked me, I maintained enough control to signal for assistance. That is not the action of a mindless monster. It's the action of someone who needs a human to function," Matthias argued. "What happens when she's not available? When she dies or runs away? Then I will find another solution, as I have found this one." Zathrian descended from the platform, moving among the assembled vampires with confidence. "But right now, in this moment, I am in control, I am thinking clearly, and I am more than capable of leading this council and this territory." He stopped in front of Vivienne. "Unless you'd like to challenge me directly." The threat hung in the air. Vivienne met his gaze, and whatever she saw there made her step back. "No challenge. I merely wanted assurance that our king was fit to rule. And now you have it." Zathrian returned to his throne. "Shall we continue with the actual council business?" The rest of the meeting proceeded smoothly. Seraphina remained in the alcove, listening as vampires debated territory boundaries, blood source ethics, and relations with human governments that knew about their existence. Twice more, when discussions grew heated and she saw Zathrian's control wavering, she sang quietly each time the king steadied. It was nearly dawn when the council finally concluded. The vampires dispersed to their quarters in the palace, seeking protection from the coming sunlight. Lucienne came to collect Seraphina, who was exhausted beyond measure. But instead of taking her to the servant quarters, Lucienne led her to Zathrian's study. The king was already there, pouring 2 glasses of deep red liquid. He handed one to Seraphina. "Wine," he said, seeing her hesitation. "I promise it's not blood." She sipped it carefully. It was wine, rich and probably expensive. She wasn't much of a drinker, but the warmth helped settle her nerves. "You saved me tonight," Zathrian said without preamble. "Not just my crown, my life. If I had lost control in that hall, Constantine would have been forced to kill me to prevent a massacre. Instead, I remained calm enough to prove my fitness to rule. He set down his glass. Your debt is cleared, all of it. You're free to go whenever you wish. Seraphina stared at him. Just like that? Just like that. He moved to the window, looking out at the city as dawn began to paint the sky pink. I'll have papers drawn up, official documentation that the debt has been satisfied. You'll receive funds to help you start over. And you'll never have to see this place or me again. It was everything she'd wanted. Freedom. A chance to rebuild her life. She should have been overjoyed. Instead, she felt a strange hollowness. What will you do? Find another way to manage the rage. Perhaps hire you as an official employee rather than a debt servant. He glanced back at her. Unless you'd prefer to leave immediately. I don't know what I prefer, she admitted. 3 months ago, all I wanted was to escape this place. But now, she trailed off, unsure how to finish. Now, he prompted. Now I think I'd like to understand why your rage exists at all. What caused it, whether music therapy could actually help long term, not just as a temporary solution. She set down the wine glass. I became a music therapist to help people. You're not human, but maybe that doesn't matter. Zathrian turned to face her fully. You want to stay, voluntarily? I want to help if I can. She met his eyes, but not as a servant, as someone you're working with, someone you're paying fairly. A slow smile crossed his face and it transformed him. For a moment he looked younger, less burdened. I think that can be arranged, though I warn you. Understanding the source of my rage means learning things about vampire history and politics that most humans never discover. It means becoming part of this world in ways you can't easily leave behind. I think I'm already part of this world, Seraphina said. I might as well understand it. They talked until the sun rose fully and Zathrian had to retreat to his chambers. They discussed terms of employment, living arrangements, and what her role would officially be called. They agreed she would continue singing for him daily, but also begin researching his condition, looking for root causes and potential treatments beyond temporary management. When Seraphina finally left his study, her mind whirled with possibility. She was free, she was employed, and she was, despite every reason not to be, intrigued by the vampire king who listened to lullabies in the dark. The next few weeks blurred together. Seraphina moved from the servant quarters to a proper room in the palace's residential wing. Nothing as grand as the vampire's chambers, but comfortable. Private. Her own space for the first time since her mother's illness had consumed everything. She spent her days researching. The palace library was extensive, filled with texts on vampire history, psychology, and physiology. She learned that vampires could experience human emotions but with an intensity that increased over centuries. Joy became euphoria, sadness became despair, and anger became the all-consuming rage that plagued Zathrian. She learned about the turning, the process by which humans became vampires. About how trauma during the turning could echo through immortality. About how vampires who'd experienced extreme violence before or during their transformation sometimes struggled with rage for their entire existence. And she learned about Zathrian's history. He'd been 28 when he was turned, a scholar living in Vienna. He'd fallen in love with a woman named Eloise, but she was promised to a lord who didn't tolerate competition. The lord had hired men to kill Zathrian. They'd beaten him nearly to death and left him in an alley to die. A vampire named Alaric had found him, offered him a choice, death or transformation. Zathrian had chosen transformation, driven by a desire for revenge. He'd hunted down the men who'd attacked him and the lord who'd ordered it. He'd killed them all. And then he'd discovered that Eloise had died in childbirth, married off quickly to her lord and discarded just as fast. The rage had started then, born from betrayal, violence, loss, and the terrible realization that his revenge had been hollow. Over centuries, it had grown rather than fading. Layer upon layer of violence and political maneuvering, and the weight of ruling all of it feeding the anger until it consumed nearly everything else. Seraphina read these histories in texts written by vampires who'd known Zathrian across the centuries. She saw the pattern, the way he'd tried to bury the rage in work, in leadership, in creating something stable and good from his immortality. But the foundation was cracked, and eventually cracks spread. She brought her findings to him one evening in his study. They'd fallen into a comfortable routine. She arrived at sunset, they talked while she sang. He conducted business between songs and she sat nearby, present but not intrusive. Tonight she spread her notes across his desk. I think I understand what's happening. The rage isn't random. It's rooted in trauma that was never processed. You were murdered, transformed, lost everything, got revenge but found no peace, and then you just kept going. For centuries, never dealing with any of it. Zathrian looked over her notes, his expression unreadable. This is hardly new information, Seraphina. I'm aware of my own history, but have you ever actually worked through it, grieved properly? allowed yourself to feel something other than anger about what happened. To what end? Eloise is dead. The men who killed my human life are dead. The world I knew is gone. What good does grieving do? It gives you a chance to heal instead of just coping. She leaned forward. Earnest music helps because it accesses emotional processing centers in the brain. It bypasses logical thought and reaches something deeper. But it's not a cure, it's a tool. The real work is addressing the source. And how do you propose I do that? His tone was skeptical but not dismissive. Therapy. Actual. Intentional emotional processing. You talk about what happened, you feel the feelings you've been suppressing. You let yourself be vulnerable in a safe space. She paused. With me, if you're willing. Zathrian stood agitated. You're asking me to discuss centuries of pain with a human girl who's barely lived 2 decades. I'm asking you to trust someone enough to be honest about what you're carrying. She didn't back down. Age doesn't matter. Training does. I might be young, but I studied for years to do this work, and I've seen it help people with trauma you wouldn't believe. I'm not people. I'm a monster. You're a person who's been through hell and survived. That's not the same as being a monster. They stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Zathrian sank back into his chair. If I agree to this, you need to understand something. Vampires don't do vulnerability well. It's trained out of us. Showing weakness can get you killed. I'm not asking you to show weakness. I'm asking you to show humanity. I lost that when I died. I don't believe that. Seraphina gathered her notes. But I can't force you. If you want to keep managing symptoms forever, that's your choice. I just think you deserve better. She left, uncertain if she'd pushed too hard. But the next evening, when she arrived at his study, Zathrian was waiting with a troubled expression. Tell me how this works, he said. The therapy. Hope bloomed in her chest. We start with the earliest trauma and work forward. You tell me what happened, how it felt, what you did with those feelings. I listen and help you process. It won't be fast, it won't be easy. But it works if you commit to it, and you'll sing when you need me to. But the goal is for you to eventually not need the singing as much, to process the rage rather than just soothing it. He nodded slowly. Very well. Where do we start? At the beginning. Tell me about Zathrian the human. Before the violence, before any of this. So he did. Haltingly at first, then with more fluidity. He told her about studying stars, about believing the universe held answers if you looked carefully enough, about falling in love with Eloise, who'd shared his passion for knowledge, about feeling for the first time like life had purpose beyond mere existence. And then he told her about the attack, the pain, the terror, the choice Alaric had offered and the desperation that had driven his decision. Seraphina listened, occasionally asking questions, always present. When his voice grew tight with old anger, she sang softly until he could continue. When he fell silent, struggling with emotions too large for words, she waited patiently. I thought revenge would fix it, he said finally. I killed them all and I felt nothing but hollow. Eloise was already dead. I'd traded my humanity for power I didn't even want. That's a profound loss, Seraphina said gently. You lost your life, your love, and your sense of purpose all at once. That's more grief than most people experience in an entire lifetime. But I didn't grieve, I moved forward. Alaric taught me to be vampire. I learned politics, I fought for position, I built an empire. His hands clenched. I turned grief into rage and rage into power. And now the rage is turning on you. Yes, they sat in silence for a long moment. Then Seraphina spoke. This is good, naming it, understanding the source. That's the first step. The next step is actually feeling the grief instead of converting it to anger. I don't know if I remember how, then we'll learn together. The sessions continued nightly. Sometimes they made progress. Sometimes Zathrian hit walls he couldn't push through, emotions too overwhelming to face. During those times, Seraphina sang until he found equilibrium again. But gradually, slowly, things began to change. The rage episodes lessened in frequency. Zathrian started catching himself before violence erupted, using techniques Seraphina taught him. Breathing exercises, grounding methods, ways to interrupt the rage cycle before it consumed him. Constantine noticed the difference. Whatever you're doing with him, he told Seraphina one day, keep doing it. I haven't seen my brother this stable in years. Lucienne remained suspicious but softened slightly when Zathrian went an entire month without destroying anything. You're either genuinely helping or the world's most elaborate con artist, she told Seraphina. I haven't decided which. But the real change was in Zathrian himself. He smiled more often. He engaged in conversations that weren't purely business. He asked Seraphina about her life, her dreams, her opinions on things that had nothing to do with his rage or therapy. And somewhere in those conversations, something shifted between them. It started small. The way his expression softened when she entered a room. The way she caught herself thinking about him during the day. wondering what he was doing in his chambers while the sun blazed overhead, the way their hands would brush accidentally, and neither pulled away immediately. Seraphina tried to ignore it. He was her patient, technically, also a vampire king, also 5 centuries older than her, also capable of killing her without effort, but he was also brilliant and tortured and trying so hard to heal. He was honest with her in ways she suspected he'd never been with anyone, and he looked at her sometimes like she was the sun itself, precious and impossible. One evening, 6 weeks into their therapy sessions, they were working through a particularly painful memory. Zathrian had been describing the aftermath of his revenge, the emptiness that had consumed him. "I stood in the Lord's manor covered in blood and realized I had become exactly what they'd feared I was," he said. "A monster, a killer, someone who took life without hesitation." "But you've spent centuries trying to be better than that," Seraphina argued. "You've built a fair territory, negotiated peace, protected both vampires and humans. That's not a monster. You only say that because you don't know the things I've done. Then tell me all of it. Let me decide for myself." So he did. He told her about wars fought, enemies destroyed, decisions made that had cost lives. He didn't spare himself or try to justify, he simply laid it all out, and when he finished, Seraphina said, "You've made difficult choices in impossible situations. You've done harm, yes, but you've also done tremendous good. One doesn't erase the other, but it provides context. You're very forgiving for someone who's seen what I am. I'm not forgiving, I'm understanding. There's a difference." She moved closer to where he sat. "You carry so much guilt, Zathrian. When do you get to forgive yourself? Maybe never. That's not healing. That's just different suffering." He looked up at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "You make it sound simple. It's not simple, it's terrifying and hard and requires facing everything you've been avoiding for centuries." She reached out, hesitated, then gently touched his hand. "You don't have to do it alone." The touch was cool, careful, like he was afraid he might break her. "Seraphina," he said, and her name in his voice sounded like prayer. "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them. Seraphina's heart hammered so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "That's not possible. I'm human. You're vampire. I'm 22. You're 500. I'm aware of the complications." A hint of amusement touched his expression. "I've been trying to ignore it for weeks, but you've seen every dark corner of my soul and haven't run. You've challenged me and comforted me and made me want to be someone worthy of your regard." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "Tell me I'm alone in this and I'll never mention it again." Seraphina knew she should lie. This was dangerous territory, crossing every boundary of their professional relationship. But she'd never been good at lying, especially not to him. "You're not alone," she whispered. The admission hung in the air between them. Zathrian stood slowly, drawing her up with him. "This is a terrible idea," he said, even as he stepped closer. "Probably the worst. You could do so much better than a rage-filled vampire king." "I don't want better, I want you." He cupped her face with both hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "I could hurt you, even accidentally, especially when..." She cut him off by rising onto her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, both of them uncertain. But then Zathrian made a sound low in his chest and deepened the kiss, pulling her closer. His lips were cool, and he tasted faintly of the wine he'd been drinking. One hand slid into her hair while the other pressed against her lower back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless despite only one of them needing air, Zathrian rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything. I know the other vampires will object. Humans and vampires don't usually. I don't care what they think, you should." He pulled back slightly. "I can protect you from a lot, but not everything. And being close to me makes you a target. I've been a target since I started helping you." She framed his face with her hands, making him meet her eyes. "I'm not afraid. You should be, probably. But I'm not." She smiled. "Besides, you're the one who's been singing my praises to the council. Pretty sure everyone already knows I'm important to you. Important is different from beloved." The words sent warmth through her entire body. "Beloved, if you'll have me." His expression turned vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "I know I come with impossible complications. I know this is asking too much. But I'm asking anyway." Seraphina answered by kissing him again. They took things slowly after that night. Zathrian was careful to the point of frustrating, always worried about his strength, his nature, the danger he posed. But Seraphina was patient. She'd learned patience through therapy sessions that stretched for hours. She could wait while he learned to trust himself with her. Their evenings took on a new dimension. They still worked through his trauma, still sang songs when the rage threatened. But now there were also quiet moments of simply being together. holding hands while he read aloud from ancient texts. Her head on his shoulder while he told her stories about the world's history that no book recorded. Stolen kisses in the moments between therapy and business. Constantine figured it out first. "You're in love with the human," he said to Zathrian one night when Seraphina was out of earshot. "Yes, that's going to create problems." "I know. And you're doing it anyway?" Zathrian looked across the room to where Seraphina was examining a medieval manuscript, her face intent with concentration. "For her, I'd face any problem." Constantine followed his gaze, then smiled slowly. "She's good for you, I approve. I wasn't asking permission." "No, but you have it anyway." He clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Just be careful. Not everyone will be as understanding." The warning proved prophetic. 2 weeks later, Lady Vivian requested a private audience with the king. Seraphina wasn't present, but Zathrian told her about it afterward. "She's heard rumors about us," he said, agitated. "She claims it's inappropriate for a king to be romantically involved with a human, that it weakens me in the eyes of the other houses." "What did you tell her?" "That my personal life is none of her concern." He ran a hand through his hair. "But she's not wrong about the perception issue. Some vampires will see this as a weakness. Others might try to hurt you to get to me. Let them try." Seraphina moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "I'm not going anywhere. You're remarkably stubborn for someone so young. I prefer determined." She tilted her head up to look at him. "We'll face whatever comes. Together." He kissed the top of her head. Together. But the challenges came faster than expected. Within days, whispers spread through the vampire community. The king was compromised. His human pet had too much influence. The rage might have lessened, but at what cost? Matthias called for another council session to discuss the human problem. Zathrian refused, knowing it was a trap. Instead, he called his own gathering, inviting the leaders of major houses for a private dinner. "I need you there," he told Seraphina. "Not hidden this time. By my side." "Are you sure that's wise?" "Probably not, but I'm tired of hiding what you mean to me." His eyes blazed red. "Let them see. Let them understand that you're not a weakness. You're the reason I'm still functioning." The dinner was held in a formal dining room Seraphina had never seen before. A massive table of dark wood dominated the space, set with crystal and silver. The assembled vampires arrived in their finest clothing, all white hair and pale skin and predatory grace. Seraphina wore a dress Zathrian had commissioned for her, deep blue silk that flowed like water. She felt absurdly human among the immortals, but Zathrian's hand on her back gave her courage. He seated her at his right hand, the position of highest honor. The vampires noticed, exchanging glances. "Thank you all for coming," Zathrian began once everyone was settled. "I've heard rumors circulating about my relationship with Seraphina Dawson. Rather than let speculation continue, I thought it best to address the matter directly." "How progressive," Vivian said dryly. Zathrian ignored the tone. "Seraphina is a trained music therapist who has helped me manage a condition that was destroying me. But she's become more than that. She's someone I trust, someone I value, and yes, someone I love." The silence that followed was oppressive. Then Matthias spoke. "You love a human, a creature who will die in the blink of an eye by our standards. This is the king you expect us to follow?" "Yes," Zathrian said simply. "Because loving her has made me a better ruler, more controlled, more thoughtful, less likely to solve problems with violence." He looked around the table. "Some of you have served me for centuries. You've seen me at my worst. Tell me honestly, am I not more stable now than I've been in years?" Constantine spoke up. "He is. Dramatically so. The rage episodes have nearly stopped. His judgment is clearer. Whatever Seraphina is doing, it's working. But for how long?" Vivian pressed. "What happens when she dies? Will you fall apart again? Will we have to repeat this cycle every few human decades?" "I don't know," Zathrian admitted. "But isn't 50 or 60 years of stability better than continued instability? And in that time, perhaps other solutions will emerge." "Or perhaps," Seraphina interjected, surprising herself, "the therapy will work well enough that he won't need me specifically. The goal isn't dependence, it's healing." The vampires turned to look at her. She forced herself to meet their gazes, even though every instinct screamed at her to look away. "You presume to understand vampire psychology?" Matthias asked. "I understand trauma psychology. The species doesn't matter as much as the mechanism." She kept her voice steady. "Zathrian's rage stems from unprocessed grief and centuries of compounded trauma. We're working through it systematically. The singing helps manage symptoms, but the real healing comes from addressing root causes." "And you believe you can heal a 500-year-old vampire's trauma in what, a few months?" Vivian's skepticism was clear. "I believe I can help him start the process. The rest will take years, maybe decades. But yes, I believe it's possible." The vampires digested this. Finally, an older vampire Seraphina didn't recognize spoke. I've known Zathrian since he was newly turned. I've watched him build this territory through sheer force of will and barely controlled rage. If this human girl can give him peace, even temporarily, isn't that worth protecting? Others murmured agreement. Not everyone, but enough. Vivienne stood abruptly. I think this is a mistake, but I won't oppose it actively unless it becomes clear the king is compromised. Fair enough, Zathrian said. The dinner continued, tense but civil. By the end, Seraphina had been grudgingly accepted by most of the assembled vampires. Not welcomed, but tolerated. It was a start. Later, alone in his study, Zathrian pulled her into his arms. Thank you, he murmured against her hair. For being brave. For defending what we're doing. I meant every word. I know. That's what made it powerful. He pulled back to look at her. I want to give you something. You've already given me so much. Not this. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring. Not an engagement ring, but something older. A band of white gold with a single ruby. This was my mother's, Zathrian said quietly. One of the few things I kept from my human life. I want you to have it. Seraphina's eyes burned with tears. I can't take this. It's too precious. You're too precious. This is just a thing. He slid the ring onto her right hand. It means you're under my protection, that anyone who harms you answers to me. In vampire society, it's a declaration of what? That you're mine and I'm yours, for as long as we both exist. She threw her arms around his neck, holding tight. I love you, she whispered. I know it's fast and I know it's complicated, but I do. I love you too. He held her like she might disappear. More than I thought I could love anything after all these centuries. They stood together in the lamplight, vampire and human, holding each other against the darkness. The following months were the happiest Seraphina had ever known. She continued working with Zathrian on his rage, watching him make remarkable progress. The episodes became rare, and when they did occur, he could usually talk himself down without her intervention. She also began taking on other clients. Word spread through the vampire community about the human who could help with emotional regulation. Other vampires sought her services, and with Zathrian's permission, she began offering therapy sessions to those willing to try. She worked with a vampire named Isolde who'd been suffering from depression for decades, with twins named Cassius and Caspian, who struggled with shared trauma from their turning, with an ancient vampire named Mordecai who'd lost his entire family to hunters centuries ago and never recovered. The work was challenging but rewarding. She was building something real, using her skills to help a community that desperately needed it, but had never acknowledged the need. Zathrian watched with obvious pride. You're changing vampire culture, he told her one night. Making it acceptable to seek help. To be vulnerable. That's remarkable. I'm just doing what I was trained to do. No, you're doing so much more. He kissed her softly. You're revolutionizing how we think about immortality and emotional health. Their relationship deepened. Zathrian was by turns protective and vulnerable, dominant and yielding. He introduced her to vampire culture, teaching her the intricate politics and ancient customs. She taught him about the modern human world, the technology and cultural shifts he'd missed while focused on vampire concerns. They traveled together sometimes, Zathrian carefully timing trips to avoid excessive daylight. They visited other vampire territories, met with leaders, negotiated treaties. Seraphina became a familiar presence at his side, respected if not always understood, but challenges persisted. A faction of conservative vampires continued to object to their relationship. There were subtle threats, whispered warnings. Twice, attempts were made on Seraphina's life. Both times, Zathrian's protective measures saved her, and the perpetrators faced swift justice. This can't continue, Seraphina said after the second attempt. They won't stop. Then I'll keep protecting you. His voice was steel. Anyone who touches you dies. That's not negotiable. But at what cost? You're creating enemies. I've had enemies for centuries. What's a few more? He cupped her face. You're worth any cost. I'm just one human. You're not just anything. You're everything. The conversation was interrupted by Constantine, who burst into the room with unusual urgency. We have a problem. A big one. Zathrian tensed. What kind of problem? The European Council has heard about your relationship. They're sending an envoy to evaluate whether you're fit to maintain your position. Constantine's expression was grim. If they decide you're compromised, they'll support a challenge to your rule. Let them come, Zathrian said coldly. I'll deal with it. It's not that simple. The envoy is Lord Alexander. He's ancient, powerful, and he has strong opinions about human-vampire relationships. Constantine looked at Seraphina, specifically that they shouldn't exist. When does he arrive? Seraphina asked. 3 days. Zathrian immediately began preparing. He called meetings with his inner circle, strategized with Constantine, ensured every aspect of his rule was documented and defensible. But underneath the activity, Seraphina sensed his worry. What if they're right? He asked her the night before Alexander was due to arrive. What if loving you has compromised my judgment? Has it? I don't know, I'd do anything for you. Burn down the world if necessary. That could be seen as compromised. Or it could be seen as having something worth protecting. She took his hands. You've been a better ruler since we've been together. More measured, more thoughtful. The rage doesn't control you anymore. That's not compromise. That's growth. I hope Alexander sees it that way. Lord Alexander arrived with an entourage of European vampires. He was tall and imposing, with white hair braided intricately and eyes that burned like crimson flames. His age was evident in the way others deferred to him, the power that radiated from him. The formal introduction took place in the throne room. Alexander examined Zathrian with an assessing gaze, then turned that same scrutiny on Seraphina. So you're the human who's captured our young king's attention, he said. His accent was thick Eastern European. You don't look like much. Appearances can be deceiving, Seraphina replied calmly. Indeed. He circled her slowly, a predator evaluating prey. Zathrian tells me you've helped him with his rage problem. Demonstrate. It's not a parlor trick, Seraphina said. Then prove its legitimacy. Alexander turned to Zathrian. Let me provoke you. If your human can truly calm you, we'll see it firsthand. Zathrian's jaw clenched. This isn't necessary. On the contrary, it's entirely necessary. Alexander smiled, showing fangs. Unless you're afraid, it was a calculated insult designed to trigger rage. Seraphina saw Zathrian's control waver, saw the red in his eyes begin to burn brighter. She started to sing immediately, a soft lullaby that had become their signal. Alexander began speaking over her song, his words deliberately cutting. Is this what you've become? A king who needs a human girl to function? Pathetic. Your predecessor would be ashamed. Perhaps it's time to step down, let someone stronger rule. The rage built in Zathrian. Seraphina could see it in every line of his body. But she kept singing, kept her voice steady and clear. She moved closer to him, placing a hand on his arm. The physical contact seemed to ground him. His breathing slowed. The violent tension eased incrementally. When she finished the song, Zathrian's eyes had returned to their normal amber. Impressive, Alexander admitted. But what happens when she's not available? When she dies? We're working on long-term solutions, Zathrian said through gritted teeth. The singing is a tool, not a crutch. Show me. What followed was a brutal test. Alexander spent 3 hours deliberately provoking Zathrian, pushing every button, insulting everything he'd built, and Zathrian held himself together. He used the techniques Seraphina had taught him. Breathing exercises, grounding methods, cognitive reframing. He only signaled for her to sing twice, and both times, he caught himself partway through the song and regained control on his own. By the end, even Alexander looked impressed. You've made remarkable progress, he conceded. I came here expecting to find a king in decline. Instead, I see someone who's found a way to manage a condition that would have destroyed most vampires. Then you'll report favorably to the European Council? Constantine asked. I'll report honestly that Zathrian has used an unconventional method to achieve conventional results: stability, clear judgment, effective rule. Alexander looked at Seraphina. Your human is an asset, not a liability. But be warned, not everyone will see it that way. There are those who would harm her to weaken you. Let them try, Zathrian said coldly. They will. Alexander moved toward the door. I suggest you prepare accordingly. After the envoy left, Zathrian pulled Seraphina into his arms. That was too close, but we passed. He approved for now. But he's right about the danger. Zathrian pulled back to look at her seriously. I think it's time we consider a permanent solution. What kind of solution? Turning you, making you vampire. The suggestion hung between them. Seraphina's mind raced. Immortality, power. The ability to truly be part of Zathrian's world without the constant threat of mortality, but also death of her humanity. Dependence on blood. Eternal existence as a predator. I need time to think about that, she said slowly. Of course, I'm not pressuring you, but think about it seriously. He stroked her hair. I don't want to lose you. Not in 60 years, not in 600 years. I want forever. That's a long time, not nearly long enough. Seraphina spent the next week considering. She researched the turning process, talked to vampires who remembered being human, weighed the costs against the benefits. It was Isolde who finally helped her reach a decision. I was turned against my will, the female vampire said during one of their therapy sessions. I resented it for decades. But eventually I came to appreciate the gift of time. The ability to learn, to grow, to become more than I could have been in a single human lifetime. But you lost your humanity, Seraphina said. I lost my mortality, not the same thing, Isolde smiled. I can still love, still create, still choose kindness over cruelty. Being vampire doesn't erase who you are. It just changes how long you have to figure yourself out. That night, Seraphina found Zathrian in his study. I've made a decision about the turning. He looked up, hope and fear warring in his expression. And I want to wait. Not forever, but a few more years. She moved to sit beside him. I'm only 22. I feel like I've barely started being an adult human. I want time to experience that fully before I give it up. Disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. That's reasonable. How long? 5 years? Maybe 10? Long enough that I feel complete with this life before I start the next one. I can wait 10 years. He pulled her close. I can wait 100 if necessary. As long as I know you're choosing this, eventually I am. I want forever with you. Just not quite yet. They sealed the promise with a kiss that turned into more. Later, wrapped in his arms in the massive bed in his chambers, Seraphina felt utterly content. She had years ahead to finish being human, and then eternity to be something else. Something more. The next few years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. Seraphina's practice expanded. She trained other therapists, both human and vampire, in her techniques. She wrote papers on music therapy for immortals, contributed to vampire psychological research, became a recognized expert in her field. Zathrian's rage disappeared almost entirely. Occasionally he'd have difficult days, but they were manageable. He'd spent centuries building rage as a foundation, and now he was replacing it with something healthier. The process was slow but steady. Their relationship deepened in ways Seraphina hadn't known were possible. They learned each other completely. Every scar, every fear, every dream. Zathrian proposed formally, human style, with a ring and everything. She said yes immediately. The wedding was a spectacle. Vampire and human traditions mixed together in a ceremony that took place at midnight in the palace's grand hall. Constantine officiated. Lucienne stood as Seraphina's reluctant but loyal attendant. Vampires and humans mingled, celebrating the union that had seemed impossible just years before. Zathrian looked devastating in formal black, his white hair flowing free. Seraphina wore white silk that made her look like moonlight. When they exchanged vows, his voice shook with emotion. "You saved me," he said. "Not just from rage, but from loneliness. From the belief that monsters don't deserve love. You saw past fangs and violence to someone worth knowing. I will spend eternity grateful for that gift." Seraphina's own vows were simpler. "I love you. I choose you. In this life and the next. Forever." The kiss they shared was witnessed by hundreds, and the cheers that followed came from vampires and humans alike. The years that followed were good ones. Seraphina continued her work, now as Zathrian's wife and partner in every sense. They traveled the world together, meeting with vampire councils, negotiating peace treaties, building a network of support for the therapeutic work she'd pioneered. She grew older, slowly but noticeably. Turned 25, then 28, then 30. The difference wasn't dramatic, but she could see it in photographs. The slight maturity in her face, the confidence in her bearing. "Are you sure you want to wait until 32? Zathrian asked one night as they lay together. "You could turn now. The age difference won't matter once you're immortal." "I'm sure. 2 more years. I want to complete the project at the university first." She was heading a major research initiative into trauma therapy for supernatural beings. "Once that's published, I'll be ready." But fate, as always, had other plans. The attack came without warning. A rogue faction of vampires who'd never accepted Zathrian's rule, who saw his love for a human as ultimate weakness. They struck during daylight when Zathrian was confined to his chambers, when Seraphina was most vulnerable. The fight was brutal and short. Lucienne killed 3 attackers before they overwhelmed her. Constantine arrived too late, finding Seraphina bleeding out on the marble floor. She'd been stabbed twice, once in the stomach, once near her heart. The wounds were mortal. Constantine acted without hesitation. He bit his own wrist and pressed it to her mouth, forcing vampire blood past her lips. It was the only chance. The blood would either turn her or kill her. There was no middle ground. When Zathrian woke at sunset to find his wife dying and covered in blood, his roar shook the entire palace. But Constantine held him back. "I've given her blood. She's turning. You need to let it happen." The turning process was agony. Seraphina's human body died slowly, cell by cell, while vampire biology rewrote her from the inside. She screamed until her voice gave out, convulsed until her muscles tore, bled from every orifice as her system purged mortality. Zathrian held her through all of it, whispering reassurances, singing the lullabies she'd once sung to him. His voice was rough, unpracticed, but he remembered every word. It took 3 days. 3 days of death and transformation. And then, as the sun set on the 4th day, Seraphina opened her eyes. They burned red like coals. She looked at Zathrian, and for a moment he saw nothing in her gaze. Then recognition flooded in, and with it, her humanity. I didn't want it like this, she whispered. Her voice was different, more resonant. I wanted to choose. I know. I'm sorry, but you're here, you're alive, that's what matters. He held her carefully, afraid she might shatter. I'm not alive, she said. Not anymore. Then you're undead, immortal. Mine forever. He kissed her forehead. We'll figure out the rest together. The adjustment was harder than Seraphina had anticipated. Being vampire came with challenges she hadn't fully understood. The bloodlust that hit randomly and overwhelmingly. The way sunlight became impossible agony. The heightened senses that made everything too loud, too bright, too much. But she also discovered advantages. Strength that let her defend herself. Speed that made her nearly unstoppable. The ability to hear Zathrian's heartbeat from across the palace, always knowing where he was. And time. They had all the time in the world now. Zathrian helped her through the transition with infinite patience. He taught her to hunt ethically, to feed without killing. He helped her manage the sensory overload. He held her when she grieved her lost humanity and celebrated with her when she discovered new abilities. I thought I'd have 2 more years, she said one night, 6 months after the turning. I know. I'm sorry it was stolen from you. But I'm not sorry I'm here. She looked at him, her red eyes meeting his. I would have chosen this eventually. Maybe not the timing, but the outcome? Yes. Always yes. Even though it was violent, traumatic, even though. She took his hand. We'll work through the trauma, I know how now, and we have forever to do it. Zathrian smiled, the expression full of love and relief. Forever sounds perfect. They resumed their work together, now both immortal, both vampire. Seraphina continued her therapeutic practice, adding new insights from her own turning experience. She became an advocate for ethical turning practices, for informed consent, for treating newly made vampires with compassion. Zathrian supported her completely, using his position to implement changes across their territory and beyond. Together they reformed vampire culture in ways that had seemed impossible decades before. Years turned into decades, decades into centuries. They watched the world change around them, adapting and growing with it. They faced challenges and enemies and political upheavals. But they faced them together, Vampire King and his queen, partners in every sense. And sometimes, late at night when the palace was quiet, Seraphina would sing. Not lullabies anymore, not exactly. But songs of love and hope in the strange, beautiful life they'd built together. Zathrian would listen with his eyes closed, and the rage that had once consumed him stayed silent, because he'd found something stronger than fury. He'd found peace. He'd found love. He'd found home in the voice of a woman who dared to sing to a monster and discovered a man underneath. They had forever ahead of them. And forever, they both knew, was just getting started. The story could have ended there, with promises of eternity and love transcending mortality. But life, even immortal life, rarely provided neat conclusions immediately. 5 years after Seraphina's turning, the European Council called for a continental gathering. Every major vampire leader was summoned to Vienna, the ancient city where vampire politics had been born. The purpose was to establish new protocols for human-vampire relations in an increasingly connected world. They want to use us as an example, Constantine explained during preparations. The success story, king and queen who've revolutionized vampire culture. Or the cautionary tale, Lucienne added. She'd become friendlier since Seraphina's turning, no longer seeing her as fragile human prey. Some of the older houses still object to your relationship. Let them object, Zathrian said. His arm was around Seraphina's waist, casual and possessive. We've proven our approach works. The journey to Vienna was elaborate. They traveled with an entourage of 30 vampires, taking private planes that flew only at night. Seraphina watched the world pass beneath them from the window, still amazed by immortal perceptions. She could see details humans missed, the way cities glowed with heat signatures, the patterns of life pulsing through everything. Nervous? Zathrian asked beside her. A little. Meeting the oldest vampires in Europe feels significant. They're just people, ancient, powerful, occasionally insufferable people, but still people. He kissed her temple. And you've faced down worse. Vienna was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The vampire presence was concentrated in old buildings beneath the city, catacombs and forgotten chambers converted into a shadow capital. The gathering took place in a cathedral-like space with vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows depicting vampire history. Hundreds of vampires filled the space. Seraphina recognized some from previous councils, but many were strangers, ancient beings who radiated power and age. They watched her with curious eyes, assessing the young vampire queen who'd started as human. Lord Alexander presided over the gathering, his presence commanding. We convened to discuss the future of our kind in the modern age, specifically, how we interact with humanity now that secrecy has become nearly impossible. The debate that followed was intense. Some vampires argued for maintaining complete separation, living entirely apart from human society. Others advocated for integration, for taking positions of power in human governments. Still others suggested something in between. Zathrian spoke eloquently about his territory, about the balance they'd achieved. We exist alongside humanity without preying on it. We contribute to society while maintaining our nature. It's possible to be vampire without being monster. Easy to say when your wife started human. Someone called out. You've softened, become weak. Seraphina felt Zathrian's rage flicker, but he controlled it effortlessly. Years of therapy and practice had given him tools that worked even under pressure. She squeezed his hand, proud. I haven't softened, Zathrian replied calmly. I've evolved. There's a difference. The debate continued for hours. Seraphina spoke too, sharing her perspective as someone who'd experienced both sides. I know what humans fear about vampires. And I know what vampires misunderstand about humans. Both species assume the other is fundamentally different, fundamentally other. But we're not. We all want safety, connection, purpose. The specifics change, but the core needs remain. Her words resonated. Several vampires nodded thoughtfully. Alexander himself looked impressed, but not everyone was convinced. An ancient vampire named Dragon stood, his presence making the air feel heavy. Pretty words from a fledgling, but you've been vampire for barely 5 years. What do you know of our struggles across centuries? I know that suffering doesn't become valid just because it's old, Seraphina replied. And I know that refusing to evolve because we've always done it this way is how species die. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Challenging Dragon was dangerous, but Seraphina held her ground, her red eyes meeting his without flinching. Dragon smiled slowly. Bold, I like that. He sat back down. Very well, I'll support the proposed protocols. Let's see if this grand experiment works. The tide shifted after that. By the gathering's end, new protocols had been established. Guidelines for ethical feeding, standards for turning humans, policies for integrating with human society. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Afterward, Alexander approached them privately. You've done well, he told Zathrian. Your territory has become a model for others. That's no small achievement. It wouldn't have been possible without Seraphina, Zathrian said. I know. Alexander turned to her. You've brought something to our culture that we didn't know we needed. Compassion without weakness. Evolution without losing our identity. He inclined his head, a gesture of deep respect. Thank you. As they prepared to leave Vienna, Seraphina reflected on how far they'd come. 5 years ago, she'd been a frightened human scrubbing floors. Now she was a vampire queen helping reshape supernatural politics. The journey had been terrifying and traumatic and absolutely worth it. What are you thinking? Zathrian asked as they boarded the plane home. That I'm glad I sang to you that first night. That everything started there. So am I. He pulled her close as the plane lifted into the darkness. So am I. The following decades were their golden age. They expanded their territory, not through conquest but through alliance. Other vampire houses saw the success of their model and adopted similar approaches. Seraphina's therapeutic practices spread throughout vampire culture, becoming standard rather than exceptional. They built schools for newly turned vampires, teaching them to manage their nature ethically. They established blood banks that provided ethical feeding options. They negotiated with human governments, bringing vampires out of complete shadow into carefully managed awareness. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and conflicts and moments when everything threatened to collapse. But they faced it together, king and queen, partners in creating something new. Seraphina's bond with Zathrian deepened in ways she couldn't have imagined. Vampire mates could share emotions, thoughts even if their connection was strong enough. Sometimes she'd feel his presence in her mind, warm and steady. Sometimes he'd sense her moods before she spoke them. Is this what you imagined? She asked him one night as they stood on a balcony overlooking Chicago. The city sparkled beneath them, humans living their lives unaware of the vampire kingdom in their midst. Better, he said. I never imagined I could be this happy, this peaceful. He turned to her, his white hair silver in the moonlight. You gave me that. We gave each other that, she corrected. Then I'm grateful for us. They renewed their vows on their 50th anniversary, a ceremony that brought vampires from around the world. Constantin, now ruling his own territory in the east, officiated again. Lucienne had tears in her eyes, something Seraphina never thought she'd see. 50 years, Zathrian said in his vows. And I love you more than I did the day we wed. Every year, every night, you show me new reasons. You challenge me, you comfort me, you make eternity feel too short. Seraphina's vows were equally heartfelt. You're my best friend, my partner, my home. You've given me a life beyond anything I dreamed. Not just immortality but purpose. Not just love but a love that changes the world around us. I choose you, today and every day after. The celebration lasted 3 nights. Music and dancing and joy that transcended species. Humans and vampires mingled freely now in Zathrian's territory. The separation between them blurred in ways that made Seraphina's heart sing. This is what we fought for, Zathrian whispered as they danced. This moment, this peace, it's beautiful. You're beautiful. He pulled her closer. I love you, Seraphina Penrose. I love you too, Zathrian Penrose. She smiled against his chest. Forever. As centuries passed, they became legends in vampire culture. The king who conquered rage through love. The queen who brought healing to immortals. Their story was told to newly turned vampires as proof that monsters could choose better. But to them it was never about legend or legacy. It was about the small moments, singing together in their study, working side by side on new initiatives, fighting when they disagreed and making up with passion, growing together rather than apart across the endless years. One night, 300 years after their first meeting, Seraphina found herself in the throne room where it had all begun. The space had been remodeled countless times, but the throne remained unchanged. She could still picture Zathrian sitting there, rage-filled and desperate, commanding her to sing. Thinking about the past? Zathrian asked, materializing beside her. How did you know I was here? I always know where you are. He took her hand. What are you remembering? The first time I saw you, how terrified I was, how certain I was going to die. She laughed softly. I never imagined this. Any of this, neither did I. He looked at the throne with an expression somewhere between fondness and regret. I was so lost then, so convinced the rage would destroy me. But it didn't. Because you whispered a lullaby and everything went silent. He turned to her, his red eyes bright with emotion. I've never properly thanked you for that, for seeing something worth saving when I'd given up on myself. You don't need to thank me. You've shown me gratitude every day in 1,000 small ways. She reached up to cup his face. We saved each other. We did. He kissed her softly, and we'll keep saving each other for all the centuries ahead. They stood together in the throne room where their story began, vampire king and queen, eternal partners in love and life. Outside, the world continued changing, shifting, evolving. But in this moment, in this space, there was only them, only love, only forever. And somewhere in the palace below, a newly turned vampire struggled with rage and fear. Tomorrow, Seraphina would meet with them. She'd teach them techniques and offer hope. She'd show them that being vampire didn't mean being monster. But tonight belonged to her and Zathrian, to the love they'd built through centuries of effort and commitment, to the family they'd created, to the peace they'd found. Zathrian pulled her close, and Seraphina rested her head on his chest, listening to the heartbeat that existed only because he chose to maintain it for her comfort. She smiled, content and complete. 300 years ago she'd whispered a lullaby to a raging vampire king, and his centuries of fury had gone silent, replaced by something infinitely more powerful. Love, hope, peace. The rage had been conquered not by force or power but by a simple song and the willingness to be vulnerable, to trust, to open up to possibility even when every instinct screamed danger. They'd chosen each other across every obstacle, human and vampire, mortal and immortal, therapist and patient, and eventually simply, beloved and beloved. It was the greatest story ever told in vampire history, not because of grand gestures or dramatic battles, but because of the small, persistent choice to love even when love seemed impossible. And it was far from over. They had eternity ahead of them, new challenges to face, new growth to achieve, new ways to deepen what they'd built. But whatever came, they would face it together, king and queen, partners, mates. Forever. Zathrian began humming one of the lullabies Seraphina used to sing to him, his voice deep and melodic. She joined in, their voices blending in harmony perfected over centuries. And in that moment, in that throne room, nothing else existed except love and music and the promise of tomorrow. The rage had been silenced, not permanently perhaps, but persistently, daily, through choice and effort and devotion. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.